Well, the sports world lost a big leader recently, David Stern, dying at 77, and part of his situation was taking over a deal with tape-delayed NBA Finals and turning it into probably one of the biggest sports brands in the world, if not bigger. My relationship with David Stern was involved with Oklahoma City and the Thunder from Seattle when working with them, but more specifically, the NBA. David Stern was a friend and not an advocate until he was won over. Gary Bettman, by the way, the number 3 guy at the NBA, became the advocate for Miami as part of an expansion process that ultimately led to Minneapolis, Orlando, Charlotte, and Miami. Note that's 4. He wanted 3 franchises to even out the schedule, but Ted Arison, the owner of a Carnival Cruise Lines, walked into David Stern's office. I was involved in that meeting. David Stern said the franchise would cost $32.5 million. Ted Arison basically left, reducing me to small talk with David Stern, and David saying, cut the gratuitous small talk, go find your financier. He came back in a couple minutes and said he was looking for an NBA store that sold expansion franchises across the street, but alas, there is none. Took out a checkbook, extended his hand. $32.5 million later, the Miami Heat was born. Now the average NBA franchise, by the way, worth nearly $2 billion. And Sports Pro says that the NBA, Twitter, and Turner Sports have announced a multi-year extension of their partnership that includes an increase of Twitter games. And since joining Twitter in 2009, the NBA built one of the largest Twitter communities in the world. 437 million followers across all league, team, and player platforms. David Stern would clearly have been proud. In that honor, in that context, want to play an interview that we did with David Stern a few years ago, giving perspective on what he thought about sports leadership, the NBA, international growth, and the like. Here's David Stern.
David Stern has never seen a glass that wasn't half full. So it's not surprising that he gave upbeat answers to Al Hunt's tough questions on this week's Political Capital. On the subject of punishment for cheap shots and flagrant fouls, the commissioner insisted he did not go easy on Meta World Peace.
Actually, I think the recent incident demonstrates how much we have squeezed violence out of the NBA. When we deal with errant acts, in the case of the gentleman formerly known as Ron Artest, he was a repeat offender, and we dealt harshly, I think, with a 7-game suspension.
Last year, over half your teams lost money. With the new contract and this year, do you have any estimate yet of how many teams will be in the black this year?
This year, we'll probably have about 10 teams losing money. And next year, I hope that the number will be down to under 5. And then after that, I would expect that all of our teams will have the opportunity to make money.
Mr. Commissioner, I know you run the NBA. You are not responsible for what happens with the Players Union, but there now is a federal investigation of the Players Union. Does that have the potential to hurt all of professional basketball?
I don't think so. I'm a lawyer by trade, and I think that the appropriate thing to do is to accord people the benefit of the doubt and see what due process ultimately yields. If I had a nickel for every federal investigation that went no place and throw in some state ones as well, I could afford to move to Washington.
Clearly words to live by as we mull the most effective commissioner in the history of sports. David Stern, obviously, at the top of that list.